Good evening, members and guests. We appreciate everyone being here. Ken, would you find a chair, please?
Can you turn off your volume, sir?
Thank you, sir. We appreciate everyone being here this evening and recover Acadia. We appreciate you being here this evening. Thank you very much.
Oh, look, I'm short. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for having me, giving me the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. Just to kind of, and Carol, I certainly welcome you to chime in to give you guys kind of an overview of how I plan to talk about the evening. I think, I'll have about 40 minutes or so to talk about both my background and my platform, and then about 15, 20 minutes for questions, and then my mother came in town this weekend for my birthday, and so I'm having dinner with her later this evening, which is why I'm not eating. So I probably will have to leave about 7:40 or so. So I appreciate your patience. I am always happy to answer any more questions that anyone has. I brought with me this evening Frances, and she is going to try and make sure that we handle any follow-ups or any questions that come that don't get answered this evening. So I just want to thank you guys, thank Ella and thank Carol for organizing this evening. And thank you for welcoming me to speak to this group. I know this has been a long-standing group of civically engaged folks, and so I appreciate you all having me here tonight. So like I said, I'll talk a little bit first about my background, and then we'll go into platform and the issues facing the city and the parish, and then obviously offer up the opportunity for any questions and answers. I know many of you in this room, but some of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet. I actually grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and moved here right after college, graduated and moved to Church Point High School, where I taught high school math for 3 years, which was a great experience. I taught Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry primarily. Did that for 3 years and lived in Church Point for the first 2 years, and then moved to Lafayette, and had at that point fallen in love with the Cajun culture, loved being here, never wanted to leave, but didn't necessarily want to keep teaching. So at that point, I actually just began to job search and found first a position in the nonprofit field where I worked for an organization called Acadiana Youth for about 6 years, did primarily fundraising for that organization, some communications, things like that. The Acadiana Youth had 3 shelters for children who had been abused or neglected. And then from there I moved on to the Community Foundation, where I also did a lot of communications efforts for them. They encourage folks to give back to their community in the form of philanthropy, primarily those with means, and try to get philanthropic dollars into the Acadiana region for the benefit of our community. At that time, after about while I was working for Acadiana Youth, I also part-time went to LSU and got my master's in public administration, which is like an MBA, like a master's in business administration, but for public administration. So for government, for nonprofit. So I had a background in leadership and management for the public sector, which includes nonprofit and government. So at the time in 2010, there was a vacancy in, at the time, City Parish President Joey Durrell's office, and he asked me to come over to the Mayor President's office to lead mostly communications, some legislative work, and a few other things. And so I did that, and in about 2012, City Parish President Joey Durrell began a planning effort, which was later called Plan Lafayette, and he asked me to help lead it out of the Mayor President's office, which I did, and coordinated with some of the other departments, and did that for a few years. And then at the end of 2014, for Mayor President Durrell's last year in office, he asked me to serve as the Chief Development Officer, which I did. Primarily at that time, I was responsible for the development and the adoption of the Unified Development Code, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about tonight. When Mayor President Robideau was elected in 2015, he asked me to serve because at that point I had developed some expertise or some experience on planning and development, so he asked me to lead the planning department, which I did in 2016 until 2018 when Southern Lifestyle Development hired me to run their traditional neighborhood developments. And then most recently, about 2 weeks ago, I ended my employment there to begin campaigning full-time. I quickly realized after I made the decision to run for office that, you know, to be able to meet the folks that I wanted to meet and learn as much as I could about the issues in advance of running for office and asking you all for my vote, that I needed to be able to devote full-time energy to that. So at this point, for the first time since I think I was probably 16 years old, I don't have a paid income, which is a little bit intimidating, I'm not going to lie, but you know, I think it was really important to get out and talk to as many people as I could and understand the issues as best I could. So I made the decision to campaign full-time until the election. You may or may probably know the election is October 12th, unless there is a runoff, which will be November 16th. So that is background. Why I decided to run for office, and I know there's a couple candidates in the room and at least one elected official, and I think, you know, I have always, really since my first job in the school system, I've always really poured my heart and soul into service, first in the classroom, then into the nonprofit world, and I really have devoted my career to trying to make my community a better place, and feel really passionately about some of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight that are on my platform and how we can all work together to make Lafayette a better place, and the Acadiana region as a whole, and Lafayette's really at the center of that. And so early this spring, when I was really considering some of these things and talking to friends and talking to family on Friday and Saturday nights about the things that I feel really strongly about, several folks said, you know, you should really think about running for office, and for a long time I said no. But at the end of the day, the only reason that I was saying no was because I had never thought that I would run for office, and it turned out that that was not a good enough reason not to do it. And so I finally decided that I would, and decided to run for office and made my announcement on March 15th, and so I have been campaigning since that time. What I'd like to do now, and I'm going to grab my phone so I can watch my time, so I leave enough time to cover everything. Just don't want to run out of time to share things. So at that point, you know, once you start campaigning, you really start listening to what people care about. And having worked in government for a little while, and you know, as I said, first in the mayor president's office, and then in the planning department, there are certainly areas that I have more experience than others. And then you may know it was part of the bio, I helped lead the Fix the Charter PAC in the fall, so that was also something that I became really passionate about and have a lot of opinions about, and I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight too. I think when I made the decision to run for office, though, I also wanted to hear from folks like you all and folks in the community about what's important. So I'm going to talk about several of the issues and things that I hope to tackle as the mayor president, but I also definitely want to hear what issues are important to you all and things that you guys want to see addressed by Lafayette Consolidated Government. So to start, the first thing that I want to talk about is how I see the job. We have been consolidated now since 1996 officially. And I think regardless, I know many of you know that we're in court on Wednesday regarding the charter amendments, and we will see where the outcome of that leads. But regardless of where the outcome of that leads, I think one of the important things that I'm trying to talk to everyone about is that this job that I'm asking for your vote for is two jobs. It's the job of the parish president, and it's the job of the mayor of the city of Lafayette. And the reason I think that's important is that parish government has some specific responsibilities. The city government has some specific responsibilities, and when we make sure to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the two offices, I think, you know, in a lot of cases we better serve our constituents. And so I'm going to talk about the role first as parish president, and then I'm going to talk about the role of the mayor of the city of Lafayette, and then talk about a few other matters. as the parish president, I think that, you know, we all had another scare about a week and a half ago, and I think that everyone knows that the primary role that the parish president needs to be worried about is drainage in our community. I think that there have been a lot of different opinions on why we've seen such stress and strain on the drainage, on our infrastructure over the last couple of years. And, you know, I think that it's time that we really start to think differently about how we're going to manage water in the community. Lafayette is a really flat place, and for generations we've invested in our infrastructure, in getting water to the Vermilion as quickly as possible, or to our coulees as quickly as possible. Certainly the maintenance needs to continue to take place. However, we also need to understand that at a certain point, with some of the rainfall that we're having, the Vermilion and our coulees can't handle it, or it's flooding our neighbors faster. And so we have to have more safe places for the water to go. That starts with regional detention and investing in regional detention. Places like Youngsville have already started that with some of the FEMA money that came in. They have applied for grants to build regional detention, which actually lowers folks' base flood elevation, makes them less vulnerable to flooding risks. And so we need to start investing our drainage dollars differently. My campaign actually announced today that on July 15th we'll actually be holding a town hall where we'll go into a lot more detail about drainage and how my campaign and then ultimately my administration will approach this issue, and we'll talk in detail about all the different ways that that governments and citizens can mitigate flooding. But ultimately, I think we all need to start thinking about how we can have what I would call, in many ways, a comprehensive and an all-hands-on-deck approach. I think many of us were, a week and a half ago when the rains came, I think a lot of us were kind of nervous about the quick rise of the floodwaters in many places. And so I think we all need to make sure that we have a shared understanding of how we're going to address this problem, and that we're investing our drainage dollars in the most, one of the words that I've been using is the most precise and surgical way possible, because the scale of our maintenance needs on the drainage channel is in the neighborhood of $600 million by some estimates. Projects like dredging the Vermilion require state and federal help and are in estimates of $1 billion. And so we have to be thinking about what we can reasonably do locally that will lower our flood risk. And we have to do that. We have to make those investments. And one of the ways you do that is you redirect existing dollars. The second thing that I like to talk to folks about the parish is that we need to, as far as parish priorities for a parish president, is we have to improve communication both among elected officials and among our citizens. One of the things that I've been out visiting with the other area mayors, and I have asked them all to participate if I'm elected in a mayor's council. And I think most of them are excited about that idea, about a regular convening of the area mayors to talk about issues that impact all of us as towns in Lafayette Parish, and an opportunity for us to collaborate where it makes sense for us to collaborate. I'll give you a good example. I was recently visiting with Mayor Brasso in Karen Crow, and Mayor Brasso has Karen Crow High School is in the city limits of Karen Crow. The road right outside Karen Crow High School is a City of Karen Crow road. On either side of Karen Crow High School, the road is a parish of Lafayette Road. When the parish went to pave that road, they paved the road that the parish is responsible for on either side of Karen Crow High School, but they left the road directly in front of Karen Crow High School not paved. Well, that's an opportunity, if we're communicating regularly with the other elected officials, to collaborate and communicate, sign an intergovernmental agreement if we have to, and do one parish paving project and get that road done, which is ultimately what our citizens want to see. Our citizens want to see us working together, finding efficiencies. They don't want that second paving going out 6 months later, 3 months later. They want that road paved in one time. But that only happens if we provide opportunities for our elected officials to communicate with one another. So working on establishing a mayor's council with those mayors, and then also coordinating and communicating with the parish-wide elected officials, the sheriff, the assessor, the clerk of court, the DA, and making sure that we tackle those combined issues together. The last thing is, and I know there's some of this that is going to be in court on Wednesday, but the parish president is ultimately going to be responsible, and also, you know, the mayor is ultimately going to be responsible if the charter split or if the council split does go through, with shepherding in the successful two new councils. If there is a parish council, I think one of the most critical things is that we're going to, for the first time in a generation, have someone studying, have 5, you know, parish council members who are studying all of the policies and budget of the council for the first time in a generation. The last time we had a parish council was 1995. So by the time the parish council takes office, 25 years later, there is going to be a renewed look at what our parish priorities are, and the next mayor president has to be ready to help lead that conversation with those elected officials. I think because of the strain for generations on the parish budget, that parish council is going to be looking at what are the core responsibilities of parish government. What does parish government have to provide to its citizens, and what is it providing that we don't as parish government have to, and what can be cut? And I'll give you an example. When I was the planning director for the city and the parish, I had a group of folks who were the codes inspectors who would go out into the city and the parish, and they would inspect houses and determine if those houses needed to be condemned and torn down. The vast majority of those houses were in the city limits of Lafayette, but the parish paid for a share of those costs, and the allocated share is determined by the allocation formula. But very rarely was there an actual structure that was condemned in the parish. And so when a parish council takes office, I will, as the mayor president, be reviewing that parish budget with the parish council to determine what is being paid for that the parish is not getting the services that they're paying for. And so we're going to have to look at the budget page by page with all of those things in mind to determine what are the core parish responsibilities and where can expenses be cut so that the core responsibilities can be delivered on. That's going to take a lot of work, and that's going to take a lot of leadership, because then ultimately, because of consolidation, those negotiations will have to also be made with the city council. All the budgetary information has to be agreed to on both sides. And so if the parish finds something that it ultimately doesn't want to pay for anymore, we're going to have to go back to the city council and we're going to have to negotiate those agreements. Those are all things that require a lot of work and leadership by the mayor president's office to be on top of. And I look forward to leading those conversations and working with both the parish council and the city council to do that. So those are the key parish priorities as I see them. There's a lot of other parish issues. Obviously, roads are a major concern. And when I talk about the core parish responsibilities and focusing on the core parish responsibilities, those are the kinds of things that we will be able to do if we take a closer look at the parish budget. And I look forward to working with the parish council to do that. If the charter split does not go through, there is still an opportunity, based on the conversation that we had last year about the charter, to encourage a consolidated council to have those conversations. However, it's just it'll be more challenging because they frequently wear both hats. But that'll still be my responsibility, regardless of which way the split goes in court, to make sure to have those conversations either with a consolidated council or two councils. On the city side, I know this group, and I know you all heard from Terry Hubel about a month ago. I think this group and many others felt very strongly about LUS. And so as the mayor of the city of Lafayette, I want to see LUS keep it strong and keep it local. It helps. We have some of the lowest rates in the entire state of Louisiana. We have some of the most reliable service and electricity in the state of Louisiana. And I think LUS has been a long time community treasure for us. that we need to continue to look to how is LUS going to help us grow into the future. LUS brought us electricity in the 1890s. It brought us fiber in 2005. And so what's the next generation of LUS going to lead us to, and how do we make LUS a key strategy for helping our economy grow as it has for more than 100 years? I think some of the conversations around LUS, I know they're just launching the integrated resource planning process that is going to talk about how we get power to our community over the next few years, and how we diversify our sources of power to make it continue to have reliable sources of energy. That's going to be a critical conversation, as well as what role LUS can play for our economic future. Planning and economic development is another really important part to me of leading a strong city parish administration. As a former planning director, I have seen both the ways that our planning and development processes hold us back and the ways they can make us stronger. And so while I was in the planning department, there were several things that I was able to do to become more customer friendly, but then there were many things that I didn't get the opportunity to do. And I think that planning is a big part of growing our economy. Our regulations and making sure our regulations make sense is a big part of growing our economy. I think that we have to continue to remove the barriers that don't make sense, and we have to continue to examine our regulations to make sure that the ones that are in place are protecting people. One of the things that I always tell people is, when I was serving as the planning director, I would tell people I will do everything I can to help you, but I won't break the law for you. And then I would say, but if the law doesn't make sense, I will work with you to change the law, right? And I think that having that mindset and bringing that mindset to the government as a whole is really important. There are places where if your regulations aren't well coordinated and coordinated beyond just the planning department, that you can stymie economic growth. And I think that that's my experience is a place where I can help kind of continue the conversations that I had in the planning department. One of the things that a lot of folks don't realize is that there's a lot of things that happen within both LUS and Public Works that are regulatory in nature, and sometimes the three departments don't coordinate like they can for the benefit of our city and parish. And so one of the things that I'll bring to the office is an emphasis on coordinating our regulations and providing clear pathways to get rid of conflicting regulations, or in some cases you have conflicting regulations that can be administratively waived. And so making sure that those things happen and that we pave the way for economic growth in our community and don't let the regulatory burdens hold us back. Now, that is not to say, regulations serve a purpose. I also told some folks that, every time you hear or see, if you all watch council meetings, if you hear angry or upset neighbors at a council meeting, in many cases what they're really saying is that there aren't the proper regulations here to help protect my property, right? So we need to continue to, and that's especially true, people feel that way, especially sometimes with the drainage situation, right? And so over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've improved the drainage regulations twice. We'll probably continue to look at the drainage regulations because the fear and anxiety in our community related to drainage is real, and so we have to be willing to have those conversations about whether our drainage regulations are adequate to continue to protect our property. So there are places where that's something that we have to balance always, is what are the regulations that don't make sense and what are the regulations that do, and continue to work towards that. And I think with my background in planning and then ultimately tying that in with economic development, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. Lafayette is at the center of the Acadian region and has to continue to be the hub of economic growth and development for the entire region. And this is, it is really, as Lafayette Parish goes, so goes the region. And so continuing to make sure that our local economy is growing and continuing to make sure that we can be the hub city that we've always been, I think is really important. We have a few meetings in the next few weeks, and I think one of the things that I'm talking to folks about to try and get a better understanding of our local economy is the oil and gas sector, and understanding that the oil and gas sector has been a long time driver of our economy, but in many cases folks are saying, look, it's not going to come back the way it was, and so how are we going to look to the future to make sure that we honor our oil and gas heritage, we continue to do what we can to train our workforce for the oil and gas industry, but we also look at ways to keep our economy growing, because we ultimately want to build a community that our kids and grandkids want to stay in, and that we ultimately bring folks here. And so, you know, that those have to be the conversations that we are having at every level. The last policy point, and then I'll talk about a few other things before I close out, is just making sure that you know, I communicate how important public safety is, and supporting our law enforcement and our first responders in this position. Without a safe community, we don't have a community that people want to come to. We don't have a community that people want to live in. We don't have quality of life. And so we need to make sure that we're working with all of our public safety officials. I'm still in the process of meeting with some of those folks, have a couple of meetings coming up with a couple of the police chiefs, and understanding what the strains and pressures are on their job is really important, because I understand that, you know, I'll be leading them, and so making sure to understand what their most pressing needs are to keep our community safe is a critical part of this job. One of the last things that I like to talk about at a high level is understanding and making sure I communicate with folks that this job is the CEO of Lafayette Consolidated Government. When I am asking for your vote, I am telling you I'm ready to lead a team of 2,000 plus employees. And I don't think that we talk about that often enough. You know, people say run government like a business. Well, one of the most critical resources in government is understanding that the folks, that 2,000 folks that work at Lafayette Consolidated Government are ultimately, you know, the more they understand about the core mission of what we are trying to accomplish, the more that they are in a better position to help us as a community move forward. And so I see it as my job to be the CEO of Lafayette Consolidated Government, to make sure that I communicate with my staff and the entire group of employees, just like any other CEO would, about leadership and vision, transparency, all of the values that you know, that I hold dear and am going to be basing my administration on, making sure that that gets communicated throughout government. You know, as an elected official, I'll have approximately 20 positions to appoint. I don't know the exact number, and a lot of folks have said, "Who's your team?" And I am telling folks that it is my job to build the best team possible. And you know, because I did work in the current administration on day one, there's going to be about 20 people that I will, or 20 positions that I am responsible for appointing. And I'm going to ask those folks, you know, encourage them to apply, ask them for a resume and a cover letter, and ultimately at the end of the day, it is my job to build the best team possible for Lafayette, and I will take that responsibility seriously and recruit, you know, the best possible officials for those roles, and then make sure that they're prepared to train their staffs to do the same. And that, I think, is something that we don't talk enough about when we look to hire our elected officials. And by hire, I mean, there's a couple people that have said to me, "You're just on a really long job interview right now." And that's what this is. But I think one of the things that I need to be sharing with folks and talking to folks about is the importance of, you know, making sure that I do everything I can to build a strong team of employees. And that's going to be really important to me. So last thing, I know we talked about this briefly when I was here last time. I am running as a no party candidate, and I made that decision because I've been registered no party for as long as I can remember. But what's really important to me is that we start to basically unify around Lafayette's problems. You know, I know I see faces in the audience, and I know there are registered Republicans, Democrats, etc. in this room, but I think that Lafayette's problems, I'm not aware of a party way to fix drainage or a party way to fix roads. You know, I think Joey Durrell, when I was working for him, was the first person that ever told me potholes aren't Republican or Democrat. So, you know, I want to work with folks from every party And I think that some of our best leaders in the community are affiliated with both parties. I've just chosen to run as a no-party candidate and use it as a unifying force in the campaign. And so I look forward to working with folks from every party, including those that aren't Republican or Democrat. And I'm hoping that we can work together to make that a really unifying thing for our entire community. I think that party politics can and do inform a lot of things on the national and state level, but I've been a long time champion for local issues, and that's what's most important to me, and so that was why I decided to run as a no-party candidate. One other thing that I did want to share with you all before we go into some questions and answers, we announced today that we are going to do at the Cajun Dome on July 15th, we are going to do a drainage town hall. We're calling a series of events called the Big Tent, which is kind of evokes that whole idea of trying to welcome all ideas. And so we're going to share, I went into high level tonight, some of the drainage ideas that our campaign will be pushing forward. And then in about a month, we'll do kind of a full presentation about the different strategies that we can do as a government and as a community to improve our water management. So I just want to share that with you, invite you all to attend. Francis can help get information to you at the end of the evening, but it is on Facebook and we're taking registrations online. If you don't have a way to access that, then certainly she can get you some information and we'll make sure to do that. So that's basically the high level. I know there are certain questions. A lot of folks have asked me questions about things like education, how I'm going to support Justin, the school board, animal control, other things like that. And so I'm happy to answer those specific questions. And then, there also may be some questions tonight that I don't know the answer to, and I would just commit to you that I'll do more research and come back. So, I still have a lot to learn. We still have about 4 months left in the campaign, and I look forward to hearing from a lot of you about what your concerns are and your questions are for the future of Lafayette. So, thank you.
We certainly encourage questions, so if you have a question for the speaker, we'd appreciate you coming up so we can run it through the broadcast here so we can get to other people that this will be something that he'll explain in a minute for you. Any questions or comments that you may have? Oh, can we at least have one?
I guess I just want to pick your brains a little bit about drainage.
Yeah.
I've been a member of the Sierra Club.
Okay.
Talked to Mr. Scheffler quite a bit.
Yep.
And I know there's a lot of hesitancy to dredge the river because of the pollutants that are probably in the mud, the deep mud under the river. In my opinion, we're going to just have to decide what piece of land we're going to ruin, probably forever, and take that mud and put it there, right? And I just want to know what your idea is about this drainage. To me, I've seen the river from the Gulf up to about Perry. Recently I stayed with friends at a camp down there. It's a state camp, and there was tugboats side by side, going past each other. It's a very navigable river, and they've dredged that part.
Right.
I don't think it goes all the way into Appleville.
Right.
But we need to, take it all the way up here past Lafayette so that our water at least will leave quickly.
Right.
Okay. I just want to know what you're going to do with that and what you got in mind.
So that's one of the areas that I first will fully admit I'm further studying, but I think that's one of the areas that we need to work with our state and federal partners, because from what I understand, that investment is quite large, in the $1 billion to $2 billion range. And so, in order for that to even be a reality for the community, we need to continue to work with our state and federal partners to do that, because of the scale is so big. Ultimately, the way that I'm thinking about the water management issue is when it's a question of volume, and we're trying to find as many safe places for water to go, right? Because we don't want water harming our property. So that's why, detention can be one of the most efficient ways to do that. Lafayette's probably not going to have $1 billion or $2 billion to dredge the Vermilion without federal help. And so looking at alternatives to that can take on large volumes of water in these significant rain events is the most efficient way for us to spend our local dollars. But that doesn't mean that we do that to the exclusion of continuing to work with the state and federal partners about our options for dredging the Vermilion, because ultimately when you dredge the Vermilion, you do also create additional capacity. So that has to be an option that we continue to explore. Thank you.
Patty Carter. I had a question about the gentleman that gave the prayer before the meeting and his stand on the family unit. And tomorrow night there's going to be a resolution to declare Lafayette as having June as Gay Pride Month. And I was wondering what your stand is on that. Lafayette basically is a conservative community, and a lot of us are just getting tired of having this type of mindset being shoved down our throat every time we turn around. And is this just the start? Everybody's seeing online about these gay parades they have everywhere, and I was wondering where you draw the line on that, or if you do. And another question I had too was, we're hearing now about CGI and developing the old Coburn warehouse downtown. And there are many developers in the community that are private developers that feel like too much of our tax money is going to develop properties that they feel should be handled by private developers only. We hear the term public-private partnerships, and it's almost always that the public bears the brunt of these and not the private developers. So I was asking you to address that.
All right, so first question, and I appreciated the prayer that the gentleman, and I haven't remembered your name yet, and I apologize for that. My understanding is that tomorrow night's resolution is about protecting folks who may identify as gay, and I think that as a mayor or president, my job is to protect all citizens regardless of how they identify themselves, and I think that is something that is, to me, important, and I'll just leave it at that. I think that on the second point related to public-private partnerships, I think public-private partnerships come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. I think that ultimately, one of the things, actually I'll go back to the drainage question. Right now, one of the ways that we develop from a drainage perspective is it require every single developer to handle their own drainage on their individual parcel and piece of land. If we do get into the business of doing public-private partnerships, we can sometimes manage those types of developments by having more efficient drainage by coordinating the public and the private drainage together. So in many cases, public and private partnerships are really about efficient types of partnerships. Now, on the economic development side, there are many opportunities depending on different community goals for us to enter into different types of public-private partnerships to meet specific goals. And I think we need to be open to those conversations without knowing the specifics of what you're talking about. It's hard for me to say one way or the other. I can tell you one of the things that I've been involved in conversations of, not necessarily all incentive programs are good or bad, and I think that we need to make sure to have some clear goals identified in mind before we push particular types of projects forward one way or the other. So it's difficult to say, you know, what exactly is positive and negative in terms of public-private partnerships without a deeper understanding of the particular situation.
Well, just to follow up, regarding the CGI.
Go to the mic, please.
Sure.
The CGI project downtown, your husband is involved with that. Will you recuse yourself
Absolutely.
from anything that has to do with that project?
Yes.
Okay.
And just, you know, just to put, my husband does work for CGI, and I have not been involved in any of the negotiations there, and I absolutely would recuse myself from any of those conversations. So thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Oh, gee, where to start, where to start? You've opened the door for quite a few questions. I'm trying not to monopolize a lot of your time, but I am kind of curious at times. There's an old saying that says, as the blossom cannot tell what becomes of its fragrance, we cannot tell what becomes of our influence. And already you have made a tremendous influence, and we thank you for your service in the past. And we look forward, I think some of us, to your future influence, and I appreciate it very much. One of the questions I have, with your statement regarding drainage, how do you feel about diverting money from the drainage project just for another library? We could always use another library, but there are more important things. So you have mentioned the drainage and how important it is to you. And what is the, shall we say, power chain? I don't quite get the, who's in charge down there? You're going to be over the city and the parish? Who makes the bottom line other than Kenneth Boudreaux? Because he is the king and everybody knows it of the city parish council. Whatever he says, he gets. And I could talk about that all night. So I need to know that. And will you have an open door policy? How difficult is it going to get to be to come in sometime and have a discussion? I know you can't pinpoint that, but at least you won't ignore us, will you?
No.
I didn't hear you?
No.
Okay, want to make sure.
Yes.
What would you do, if anything, if suddenly 10 or 15 buses came up from Texas with a bunch of illegal immigrants in it? Half of them couldn't speak English, and some of them I understand even from China now. What action, if any, would you take to stop it, or would you help it along, or what is your opinion on that? And a real important question bugging me, what is the difference or the purpose in a regulation? It doesn't mean do diddly squat. It has no power of law, so what's the purpose in a regulation? I know a purpose in an ordinance, that's law. But just to make a regulation, it seems like they're made just to pacify somebody. I've had a regulation that's still in the book since 2014, and they won't even discuss it. They won't tell me why they won't talk about it now. I've tried for 5 years to get a response. All I get is a blank stare and some dirty looks. One more question, I think. How long are we going to have to continue flying the flag of hypocrisy in Lafayette about consolidation? That is hypocrisy first class. Everybody knows that. Joey Durrell said it. Joel said it. I'm sure you will agree. We are not consolidated, so why are we so hell-bent on flying under the flag of hypocrisy? Wouldn't it be just as simple as say Lafayette City Parish government and cut out a lot of that crap, excuse me, a lot of that stuff? And I think I had one more. Nope, I guess that's it.
It's a lot on a small piece of paper.
Yes, it is.
Oh, one more thing. Do you have veto power in Baton Rouge and in Washington, D.C.? The president has veto power for bills that come his way. And in Baton Rouge, the governor has. Do you have veto power over either the city or the parish or both? Or will you have, or is that a good project to work on, because I'm not the only one that's confused. Anybody else confused?
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's build that influence. Thank you.
I'm glad I took notes. Thank you, Mr. Green, for your questions. I think I have about 7, and I'll try to address them all. And I'll try not to leave anything out. So the drainage and the library, I think that I'm definitely supporting the initiative on the ballot in October to move the money to support basically have an infusion of money into the drainage system. I think that that's a great opportunity for me when I'm coming into office to help start some of the detention work that we've just been talking about. I think that is something that we really need to be able to use the resources. Now, I want to make sure that we also have conversations across the board when we're having decisions like that, and making sure that we're handling operating budgets for all of the, when we are removing money. I think that's been one of the conversations that hasn't always been talked about, but to continue to provide a strong fiscal stewardship for all of our public entities. In terms of the city parish, I think you call it the power chain is what you said. And so I think that, this position is the mayor president is ultimately in charge of, and that's why I spent time talking about the importance of the role of the CEO and the importance of the role of the executive branch to lead both the parish council and the city council. Absolutely. And I think that the position needs to help shepherd both councils, and ultimately, but when you're the executive in charge, the buck stops with you. And so I understand that, and I understand that's going to require a lot of work, communication, coordination, but that's what executive leadership is. Open door policy, absolutely. Most people that have worked with me know I'm kind of obsessed with being responsive and making sure people hear from me. Obviously, when you're in a role like mayor president of a community of 240,000, you have to figure out a way to manage that. But returning phone calls, returning emails, having opportunities to meet with folks are one of the most important things to me, and certainly what I feel like the job, that I make both myself and my staff available to the citizens to continue to provide, a really front door to the government, and making sure that people feel like their government is working on their behalf. On the question about illegal immigrants, I am ultimately not an expert on that, but I plan on working with the sheriff and following the lead of our public safety officials. My understanding is that the sheriff would help us in not letting illegal immigrants into our community, and so I will follow his lead with that, because ultimately, as I said, that is something that we as a community have to follow state and federal law, and I'll support the sheriff and the police department and us ultimately upholding the Constitution.
Follow the Bible, very simple.
Right. And then ordinances and regulations, I think that, I probably, when I was up here earlier, was using those terms interchangeably. And so some of the times when I was talking about regulations, I actually meant things that were in ordinance or in law. And so, because sometimes when we pass an ordinance, those become the regulations that the departments follow. There can be policy statements that are not binding. Those are different. But typically, when I was saying regulations, I probably meant the law. So I didn't mean to kind of confuse you there.
Well, I'm not too bright, so you have to break it down.
Well, and I apologize for that, because I probably just didn't use enough detail or enough clarity. Because I think you're plenty bright, sir. As far as consolidation goes, I think that you are correct. There's been a lot of talk about what our government looks like and whether it's consolidated or not. And the way that the voters voted on it, I believe they voted in 1992 to consolidate. And I'll put it in quotes because it was not true consolidation, but ultimately it became the charter of our local government. And I think that the number one thing there is that once we have a charter, that's a charter that we live under, right? And so the charter is very specific about how you amend the charter, and until we amend the charter to consolidate budgets, then the budgets have to remain separate. In 2011, there was a deconsolidation vote put before the voters that ultimately failed, which is why some of us who worked on the charter amendments in 2018 felt like if deconsolidation failed and the voters in 2011 weren't ready for deconsolidation, then these charter amendments that were proposed in 2018 at least restored, taxation and representation, that link between taxation and representation. As the mayor president, my job is to help lead the next government, but I will be absolutely committed to continuing community conversations about ways that we can look at amending our charter if necessary for the benefit of our citizens. Veto power, yes, the mayor president has veto power, and that veto power can be overridden by the city parish council.
Say that again?
The veto power can be overridden by a 2/3 majority of the council.
So they ultimately have more power than you?
On budget, yes, ultimately they can veto. So now they have to come to a higher level of agreement to do that, but yes, they can.
So I mean, your veto power.
Right, if the council takes an action and I veto it, and I do have that ability to do it, the council can override with a higher percentage, a 2/3 vote.
Both the city and the council?
Right, yes. Depending on the action, sorry, I didn't understand that you meant with the split. Yeah, so yes, ultimately, depending on what the ultimate, if it was an action of the city council, it would be, as the mayor of the city, I could veto, and then it would have to be overridden by the city council. If it was a joint budgetary matter, it would be both councils. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm concerned about the Lafayette Lafayette Economic Group, whatever they call it. Two examples, I think the citizens got burned on. We built that facility for Textron, for Bell Helicopter, and they never met their responsibilities. I'd like to see more teeth put in. I'd like to see more teeth put in these agreements for incentives, tax incentives, where if they pull up or they don't meet the criteria, that they heavily fined, where they just can't pull up stake and leave. We had a call center in Northgate Mall, a company out of Canada, did the same thing. I mean, we need to put some teeth in those agreements. I know sometimes it's in conjunction with the state, but I pay taxes. I don't want some company come here and don't meet. We give them all these tax incentives. They don't meet the employee count and everything else. It's happened too many times. We really need to look at those agreements.
I think my answer can be short on that one. I agree. And I think in some cases, those agreements are written with the Louisiana Economic Development. Some are written with our local Economic Development Authority. The local Economic Development Authority has mayor-president appointments. The mayor-president has no direct control, but I look forward to working with all of our economic development partners to make sure that those agreements do have teeth that protect our citizens and our taxpayers.
The Mark Pope.
Hi, Mark Pope, a candidate for current City Parish District 5 or candidate for new City District 1. Statement of fact, Carlee, Unchi Poo opinion, and then a question. We are talking about electricity and LUS. Last year, LUS, I'm not sure the exact how the mechanism, how it worked, declared that 20% of our energy would come from renewables. We have clean energy. It's called natural gas. LCG, LUS owns half of a power plant in Boyce, Louisiana. It is a coal-fired plant. It needs to be converted, and as you know from talking to Terry Huval, it's a very easy conversion. That plant has been online for about 40 years. So, my question, why the obsession with renewable energy? Renewable energy, some will come up here and tell you it's cheaper. It's getting cheaper. It's cheaper because we subsidize it. The federal government and ratepayers subsidize it. So when the subsidy goes away on, quote, renewable energy, our rates go up. So, as a candidate in the executive position, would you be for or against keeping the 20% renewable, reducing it, or increasing it?
Thank you, Mark. That's a great question. And the first thing that I want to say is that I actually, and I kind of made this disclaimer when I started, I have a few conversations that I have yet to have, and one of those is with some folks from LUS. So I've talked a little bit with Terry Huval, but we haven't gotten into the weeds of where our power sources come from. And so ultimately, the short answer to your question is that I don't know enough yet to answer in an answer that I'm confident in, because I want to do more research, frankly. I support exploring renewable energy when it makes sense for our community, and I think we just need to continue to understand where our energy is coming from, what's the most efficient way to provide it, and then making sure that when we have that conversation, we look towards the future. Certainly one of the limitations in looking at renewables, though, is understanding whether those tax credits ultimately will long-term negatively impact us when they expire or if they expire. So I don't frankly have a definitive answer for you right now, because that's one of the questions that I want to continue to explore. My knowledge base at this point is incomplete.
First question, Carlee. You said you have a degree from LSU in public administration?
Yes, sir.
And then a master's from where?
Well, the master's is from LSU in public administration.
Okay. On the broader question of fuel and energy and all that, Louisiana is a natural gas province. Another city has converted the buses to natural gas and provide a natural gas station, right? What do you think should be the city's role further in promoting the use of natural gas, considering I believe global warming is very real, and increased use of natural gas, converting the plant, more automobiles? Should y'all be involved with more expansion of use of natural gas, and even to the point of bringing oil companies here who explore and produce for natural gas? Should y'all be involved in that?
So again, that's an area where I'd like to do more research, Tom, but I think that, we have invested as a community in natural gas for our transportation system, and certainly our history in oil and gas gives us an opportunity to continue to be a leader in the energy sector generally, and so that's an area where I want to continue to explore for sure. Thank you.
I have one last question. You were involved in Fix the Charter. If everybody wanted their voice in the city and in the parish, in Fix the Charter, why was it not recommended that you have a separate parish president and a separate city president? Because it's impossible to serve two masters. You cannot split yourself. If your parish council wants one thing and your city council wants another, where is your loyalty?
You guys are having great questions. I appreciate that. I have two answers to that question. I believe that when we have a mayor and when we have a parish president, that ultimately splitting the executive branch means that you've made managing the government and having the staff serve two masters, and that becomes much more effective if it's deconsolidation. And so I think the voters voted on deconsolidation in 2011 and they rejected it. But many people, including myself, after that said, look, we have issues that we still want to fix. And so I think this effort to fix the charter was about linking taxation and representation again. I think if later on down the line, the city of Lafayette still wants its own mayor, that ultimately that is something that we can ultimately vote on at a later date. I believe my job as mayor president is to run a single government and to run the most effective administration possible. And ultimately having a mayor and a parish president would have all of the departments serving multiple masters.
Everybody, anyone that wanted to come up has made it the trip to the mic that I do. But anyhow, appreciate our speaker this evening. We certainly a round of applause. We need to
Are there any other candidates here tonight?
What?
Are there any other candidates here tonight?
I
If
don't
they'd
know.
like to raise their hand
Candidate for what?
for local offices.
Council.
Okay. All
I
right.
think I said that.
I'll talk with you after the meeting.
What is your
Get a chance.
position again?
Oh, yeah, state representative for District 31, Jim Dorrit.
Hey, Jim, yeah, thanks for coming, Jim.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Jim.
State
too.
representative.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other solid, running for what?
City District 1.
Oh, fantastic, congratulations.
RC Paris District what?
2.
See, we don't know. We don't know.
I know.
We don't know? Okay, that'll be made up before too very long, I would assume. Anyhow, I'd like for Ed to come up and for the people that wasn't able to come here, we do a pretty good job of processing this tape, and he will tell you how you can get to YouTube in 3 or 4 days or something. They'll be able to really find out what went on. Mr. Ed?
Yeah, we take the video from people come up here and talking and do such, and we put it on YouTube and we put it on AOC. And it'll probably be by Saturday morning that I'll have it there in both places. And to get to it, let's say you go to YouTube, at the top of the screen will be a search bar, and you type in CCGG dash, and you can put today's date, or you can put the name of the person that spoke, and hit enter, and it'll immediately find that video. You can click on it and it'll play. It's the same process on AOC. Okay, any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, just thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
How about that? Yeah.
Mr. Allen?
I just wanted to mention Frank Flynn, our past president's funeral will be Saturday at noon at St. Mary's Church.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. No other questions? The meeting stands adjourned. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Thank you.